Okay. And this is Chipicon, and welcome to tonight's Changing Times, Changing Worlds show. It's the night before Thanksgiving Eve, which is going to be a little bit different for because I'm not sure how many people are going to show up, but for you who are watching this later on YouTube, that's what the rest of us are doing tonight is thinking about tomorrow and the very weird holidays, which got me thinking we're getting into the holiday season, and there's a lot of very strange things being said and going around the internet, and perhaps I'm spending too much time on the internet, but where else are you going to go? About how, well, if it's Christmas but it has pagan antecedents, doesn't that make it secular? Since Santa Claus is is according to some a reworking of Odin, and I'm not really sure how they get that one, but if a lot of our customs weren't borrowed from pagan variations, then that makes it secular. And since Santa is secular, there's no reason for stores to suggest that all of their employees wear Santa hats, even if they're Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or like, excuse me, no, Santa is Christian. And if someone wants to enjoy Santa, even though if they're from a different religion, I think that should be up to them. But if they don't, I don't think the store has any business trying to claim that just because they think everybody celebrates Christmas, everybody enjoys Santa, everybody does it our way, that it's secular and therefore people should just go along. Christmas is Christmas. And while it probably wasn't December 25th and certainly didn't have Santa Claus, William has just shared a YouTube video in the chat, which unfortunately I don't think I can share here during this thing, but
well, I had directed it to everyone.
Yes, but if anybody's watching elsewhere, can you tell people what to look for on YouTube?
Okay, Horace Christmas, presented by the Lutheran Satire Channel.
Oh, the Lutherans, they have a lot of fun stuff on YouTube. Okay, so you can look for that if you can't click it live. But basically, yeah, I find religious history fascinating. Reading about how Christianity built up from a very small sect into a powerful religion that was able to win over the Roman emperors and thus become mainstream Roman, and then gradually nibbled its way up into most of the countries, because historically, if you got the leaders of a country, then they counted the country as Christian, even if the rest of the people knew nothing about it. And gradually people started being Christian till about the year 1000. They'd gotten most people to at least say they were Christian or believe they were Christian of some variety. Although it's never the same thing. It's been 2,000 years of evolution to create the Christianity as it is now. This may be a little bit of a side swipe, but people that I'm in communication with are talking a whole lot about the season finale of Supernatural. Do any of you hear about what was going on in Supernatural? Apparently in the final episode, and I think there were like 15 seasons, it went on far too long. I gave up after about the third year when they simply started acting like anything that wasn't an angel and was supernatural was a demon and should be killed with great prejudice. But apparently an angel showed up along the way, and in the final episode, the angel admitted that he was in love with one of the Winchester brothers and was sent to hell because you can't have a gay angel. And yet at the same time, they showed how it was going to go on later, and the Winchester's car went to heaven. So you can have cars in heaven, but you can't have.
Oh God, someone on my Quora feed asked, what is a Christian automobile?
Yeah, exactly.
So I answered, one which has been validly baptized.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. I have heard people arguing that all the good little budgies and kitties and doggies go to heaven, but the big mean ones like the pit bulls don't go to heaven because they can't go to heaven. It's like people we
They
like go to heaven.
purgatory.
No, purgatory was invented around.
No, purgatory.
That's what I said, purgatory.
Purgatory.
He's making a pun, Aristorm.
Oh, okay. By the Catholic Church, when they finally couldn't, they kept trying to convince people there was no such thing as ghosts, because after all, their doctrine was you get buried and then you wait for the final trumpet, and then they're going to have the final judgment, and everybody gets sorted, and you go to heaven or you go to hell. But it was quite obvious that dead people kept showing up, and so they said, those people are in purgatory and they're working off their sins, and you can give us money to pray for them, and they will and that will help them get out of purgatory. So that was just another wonderful
it's called adapting.
evolution of the we were theorizing today, where does this anti-gay bias come? And I think it comes from single gender communities where they
no it's actually in Judaism.
It's really in Judaism.
Yeah,
well, we know
it's in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and there's only really 6 places in the Bible where they even talk about it at all, and 2 of them, neither Ezekiel and Jesus, don't mention the problem as being anything to do with sex and everything to do with hospitality. And that's Sodom and Gomorrah.
So does the Talmud.
And
cool.
But I mean, that's really, I mean, although I'll sit there and say even not every Greek was in favor of it either. Xenophon was not a fan. So on and so forth. So it's one of those things that's never been wholly accepted in any culture, but some of them have outright forbidden.
And Judaism is very, very strongly pro-procreation, in contrast to its Christian offspring, where we have the attitude, well, it's really better to remain chaste.
Well, that's complicated. I'm actually, there's a wonderful woman, Amy Jill Levine, who's Jewish. She teaches New Testament at Vanderbilt University. And
interesting.
And she's marvelous. Well, of course, what she's doing, she ties Jesus to his Jewish roots. Jesus.
That sounds good.
But writes very much for Christians.
Well, sure, there are parts of the Gospels you can't understand without being familiar with Jewish law, like that bit about washing the inside of a dish but not the outside. You think, who would do that? But when I read Tractate Kelm, they are arguing over exactly if the inside of a vessel becomes ritually unclean, does it convey uncleanness to the outside?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I've got, but anyway, we've kind of wandered a little off.
Yeah. Well, I was already wondering.
Yeah.
It's a strange thing. We are looking at, I am bothered by the way people want to tell other people how to celebrate their holidays and decide what other people mean with their holidays, and try and come up with a blanket, this is okay for everybody. What's okay for everybody is eating food together, usually. On the other hand, you have to make sure that you do not put butter in the stuffing if some of the people in your who are eating at your table are lactose intolerant. And so, yeah, but it's only in the inside, so I didn't baste it. No, you don't understand lactose intolerance, guys. But we are dealing with a lot of issues. People just tend to think everybody's like them and think the way they do and react the way they do. And the older I get, the more I discover that we aren't all the same. There are huge differences. People don't think like I do. I can be taught, and when you're working with a large bunch of people, you have to take into account the needs of other people and how they're going to react and how they're going to deal. When we look at the diversity, I don't know what the numbers are these days. I mean, theoretically, the census will tell you how many of any given religion we have in America. I don't know.
I've seen some information that shows that the number of people who declare any kind of a religion has shrunk.
Yeah. And
there's a greater number of nuns, NONES.
Yeah.
Than at any other time.
If they don't put a place down for pagan, then how are they going to count them? This is one of the things that kind of bugs me.
This last census was so stripped down of information. And unfortunately, the next one won't be for another 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's sad because they're really not collecting data that just plain interesting.
Yeah, it is. I tend to think but then again, I hang around with a lot of pagans. So I tend to think that there are a lot of pagans in the world. And I think that there's a huge category of people who don't care. That's like, well, I may be working out my own spirituality, but yours is none of my business. So I'm not going to comment when you talk to the gods. And to a certain extent, we can get along that way. I personally get along fairly well with many Christians and many other, and then you get like, do you count Hindus as pagan because they have multiple deities? Well, a lot of them say, don't count us as pagans. You neo-pagans are a little weird and you make us crazy, and no, we don't want to be under the same umbrella as you. And
so I suspect they think of it as something as a Western phenomenon rather than, I don't know, but I suspect they
have quite an ancient tradition of their own. They don't
very ancient
need to be associated with some of the people who are discovering how comfortable it is and how the world gets a lot more logical when you recognize a lot of beings. And I know the heathens don't want to be. It's like, no, it's just an umbrella. Let's get it counted and we'll find out whether there are 2 or 3 million of us. And no, we will not be in the same umbrella with you crazy Wiccans and such.
And nobody wants to be associated with the Satanists.
Who knows? I actually have a great. I'm rather fond of the Satanic Church that is doing so much good political work. They seem to be do nothing except get money together so they can have lawsuits on freedom of religion and say, hey, if you want to say this, then you have to include the same rights to everybody else, and piss off the people who think that the only religion is the way they do it. I have a great fondness for the Satanic Church. Satanists, they're right up there with sparkly vampires. But it's kind of hard. We are dealing with a weird. Now, I'm trying to bring it back here tomorrow. We're dealing with. What would you say that Thanksgiving was a secular holiday? It certainly didn't start out that way. Certainly, the first Thanksgiving was not considered secular. At the same time, there were more Native Americans, there were more indigenous people there than there were English immigrants. And so clearly there were more polytheists there than there were, they weren't Church of England. I don't remember.
No, the Pilgrims were not. No.
Independents.
They
what we now call Congregationalists.
Well, they're not the same as Puritans.
Yeah, the Pilgrims and Puritans were different, and I forget what. And
not everybody that was on the Mayflower was a pilgrim.
No, some of them were.
I've got an ancestor who was on the Mayflower who was not a pilgrim.
Right, saints and strangers by whoever it was. But the funny thing was, what I was taught was that the Pilgrims at Plymouth helped the people at Massachusetts out during some crisis, and gratitude, everybody in Massachusetts agreed to join their church.
Oh, really?
So I was taught. What has the Church of England ever done for us?
Whereas I tend to think of hearing about how they went over and tore down the maypole at, was it Marymead and what's now Medford? Marymount. And but the thing is that so much of it was confused because, especially when you're trying to look into the history of surviving paganism, when you're reading historical accounts, the Protestants referred to the Catholics as pagan, and the Catholics referred to the Protestants as pagan. So you think, hey, I found a source. No, I don't have a source. They're not doing anything pagan. They're just doing Christianity a different way. Really, the history of religion is fascinating. I get quite irate when you go into a history of religion class and they're talking about a history of the Catholic Church. And so, wait a minute, you haven't mentioned Shinto, and you haven't mentioned Hindus, and you haven't mentioned any of the others. It's like, well, we're going to have a chapter on that at the end of the course. Like, guys, it's history of religion. You're talking about history, all of it. And no, but even if you just look at the development of Christianity, it's fascinating. And
Christianities, plural.
Quite.
And almost right from the beginning.
They did. That's why Constantine told them, okay, I'm going to make Christianity the Roman religion, but you have to tell me what you guys believe. So bring them all together, and you'll have a discussion and decide what you believe. They couldn't
St.
agree.
Nicholas punched out Arius.
They couldn't agree with, they came up with something.
He wasn't so jolly then.
It was fascinating, but
And
someone,
Constantine wasn't exactly happy when they, didn't consider him the top
yeah,
most
well,
important.
he kind of said he insisted that he was.
Well, he was, every Roman emperor thought he was
Yeah.
the
Well,
top man.
Roman emperors were the
And
head priest of the Roman.
mm,
Well, they
well,
were
I'm not
called,
so sure by Constantine's time that was so.
well, no, but on
Um,
the other hand,
Constantine, when Constantine died, he was routinely deified by the Senate.
yep. Well,
the Roman Senate wasn't all that big a deal by the end of the 3rd century. It had become
They
something
got to
more
deify
tied
people.
to the city of Rome and Italy and not so much to the rest of the empire.
but of course, modern,
It's again one of those things that a lot changed in the Roman Empire.
the Roman Empire changed.
Even their understanding of the gods had shifted. By the time you get to Julian and trying to restore
Poor Julian.
the old time religion, he really, he definitely didn't have the same understanding that they had in Augustus's day.
No.
But and Sol Invictus was almost, he had kind of gone ahead of Jupiter and was in some senses almost a monotheism. Not quite, but it moving in that direction.
But then, and in Isis during the empire part, after you passed out from the Republic into the empire, Isis was a huge Roman goddess, and
she hasn't raised her prices.
Isn't Isis a Egyptian goddess? Yes, but once they annexed Egypt, they
she was already morphing under the Ptolemies.
Yeah,
as they amalgamated. The Ptolemies made a lot of the changes that then the Roman Empire inherited.
Mm-hmm. But it's always in a state of flux. Even I'm not 70 yet, and I can remember changes that went on. Now, what was it called in the 60s, where the Roman Catholic Church reinvented itself and said they were going to do the Mass in English?
Well, it was Vatican II.
Vatican II, and
which was when they, yeah.
And the Pope is infallible only goes back to the 19th century, and the idea of a celibate clergy only goes back to the 11th century. Where apparently that one came from they were trying to create a meritocracy because so many priests and bishops were wanting to pass their bishopric down to their kids. And they said, no, the Christian church is supposed to be a meritocracy, and you can't pass it to your children. Some of them are idiots. And says, okay, fine. Priests already have one sacrament. You can't have marriage too. So there. And suddenly priests had to be celibate, which of course worked just about as well as one would imagine. But then they had to promote their kids on their theoretical merits, as opposed to, that's my kid, he gets to get my bishopric. So it was, if you look through it, it's an amazing, there are changes all along the way. And I think of Gregory the Great because my personal historical period of interest is the early Saxons, time they were becoming converted. And this same, apparently the Vatican keeps some really good records. The same day that the Pope sent off a letter to Augustine in, and this is not the same Augustine of Hippo that changed a lot of the way the church worked, but it's a different Augustine. The Pope sent him up kicking and screaming to convert the Angles and Saxons. And he sent a letter down and said, how do we get these guys to accept Christianity? And he said, well, what you do is you build churches on their holy sites. You have feast days on the days they already feast. And you basically dress Christianity up in the clothing that get them to keep on doing what they were doing, only do it in the name of Christ. But the same day he sent that letter northward, he sent another letter over to Greece. And Greece, of course, had been Christianized, in the 1st and 2nd century. And he said, oh, if those people who clearly having been Christian for 6 centuries should know better, are still having their sacrifices and still having their processions and still having pagan religious practices, put them to death. Same day, the whole idea is we're trying to get some new converts up in England, but in Greece, where they should know better, if they keep on doing the old ways, kill them. So it wasn't that he was so open-minded and he was simply a politician. He knew do whatever it takes wherever the situation is. And that was it was kind of eye-opening for me to read about.
Interestingly enough, the Muslims, when the Greek philosophical schools were being closed down, said, come on over. We'd love to learn Greek philosophy.
I remember the stories of in the 6th century which is the 500s, when they were trying to do the conversion for in the Byzantine emperor was Julian was trying to convert them, and that what they were doing is they were putting in laws bit by bit. And like on 526, they said no teachers. We got to protect the children. No teachers can be pagan. And then in 939 they had no doctors. Doctors must not be. We can't have them using those superstitious prayers. They have to be Christian doctors. And just little bit by little bit by little bit, every 2 or 3 years they would cut it down a little bit more. And you can't be this if you're a Christian. You can't be that, until I think it was just before the bubonic plague hit in 39. They said no one is allowed to make a will. Anyone who is not Christian cannot have a will, and therefore all of their goods and chattels revert to the state. Unless they are Christians. And if they're Christians, then they can leave it to their kids. Well, can you imagine the kids going to their parents and say, Dad, you don't have to mean it. Just say you're a Christian, or all of your stuff, we won't get it. I mean, and talk about practical ways of getting people to convert. And this, you can see why I study history. It's fascinating. Does history of religion have a lot to do with religion? Well, intrinsically, yes. But when you have this kind of background and you look at what goes on today, and you see Walmart or Target or whatever saying, well, Santa hats are secular. You might as well wear them. It's not going to hurt you any. No, except that you have a choice. You can keep the only job you can get and keep putting food on the table. Or you can do something that feels like you're taking on the trappings of another religion. And
what religion? Sorry, I'm coming in here. It's a double bind. People who don't like evergreens and men in red suits say, oh, those are Christian practices which you nasty, awful people are imposing on us. And that proves how reprehensible is Christianity. And people who do say those are pagan things which you stole from paganism, TM, which proves how reprehensible is Christianity. I wish they would fight each other out between themselves and tell us who won, so we could figure out what we're supposed to feel guilty over.
Oh, everything. Clearly everything. It gets
including the Black Plague.
It gets
Yeah,
very weird. And
anyway, it's the marathon department store sale season is not Christian or religious. Advent is supposed to be a penitential season, and the Christmas season starts on December 25th. It does not end then.
Yeah, you know that, and I know that, but I don't think that Target and Walmart know that.
This year I saw Halloween
and I don't
advent
think
calendars.
They care.
Halloween advent calendars. If we can sell it
to count down to Halloween.
If you can sell it during Christmas, if we can make sales that way.
The Halloween displays start in August now.
And now you can leave your tree up all year, and you can just hang carrots and eggs on it at Easter, and hearts on it in February, and shamrocks on it in March, and little flags on it in June, or in little red, white, and blue lights. It's like, no, if our God in America, they say in God we trust is on the money. That's because that's the way we worship, is by circulating money. I'm sorry, that's really rude, but it really seems that way. It really looks like the only thing.
It only goes back at the thing on the coins and stuff only goes back to 1956.
When we were so terribly afraid of becoming godless.
And so does One Nation Under God.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's a couple of years earlier.
Did fine without it's in the 50s. Eisenhower.
Yeah, but they were just so afraid, and the terrible fear of socialism, because they were looking at Stalin, and that was pretty horrible. But rather than saying, oh my gosh, look what Stalin's doing, they were said, oh no, it's communism, therefore we have to do everything that isn't communist. And I don't know, just anytime you try and simplify something down to one way, it seems to make everything worse. What's wrong with diversity? Diversity is, in the ancient world, each tribe, each valley, each river had its own god. And nobody it didn't seem to bother anyone. Nobody asked the farmers to sacrifice to the soldiers' god. Nobody asked the smiths to deal with the farmers' gods. Everybody, you worked with the gods you worked with, and nobody expected anybody to. Well, everybody liked the Great Mother because nobody wanted a limp dick. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Are there rules for what you could say on YouTube? I apologize. I
think we're probably marked adult anyway, because we don't want to get accused of proselytizing to the kiddies.
Goody.
Yeah.
But
I mean, my videos I put up are marked for kids, but I'm doing them for school kids.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. Once I start thinking about the abuses of religion, and religion can be a really beautiful thing, but when it starts being mixed up with politics, things get ugly really fast.
Well, I would argue the United States is actually one of the first places where it wasn't mixed up in politics, or where they made a conscious effort to separate.
Probably because so many of the people had come over. Penn wanted to have a place, a safe haven for the Quakers, and
they understood
for the
what had torn apart Europe.
yeah, and yeah,
And
As everybody, I was indoctrinated with Protestant good, Catholic bad. And then I found out, well, ask any Irishman about the penal laws.
mm-hmm. And it was so much of what went on with the witch burning, the burning times, was Catholics accusing Protestants and Protestants accusing Catholics, and both of them using the witch hysteria to have an excuse to go after their the people they didn't like. Speaking of people they didn't like, us, there's a woman who did a study in one town and looked in all of the records, the trial records, and found out that 80% of all people accused of witchcraft were mothers-in-law. They were accused by their sons-in-law or their daughters-in-law.
Why am I not surprised?
So, it's all what you're looking for, I suppose. But that person happened to notice that pattern, and people, once you get a level of hysteria, and as soon as they came down and said, no, we're not going to go after witches anymore, suddenly in the 1700s, you see a very similar vampire hysteria. Luckily,
said there's interesting articles about, the graves in the colonies that you can tell they were putting down vampires.
but luckily the difference between witch hysteria and the vampire hysteria was that other than desecrating corpses, they weren't hurting people.
Yeah.
So that was, and then they got mad at that and they said, let's not do that anymore. And usually that comes from the top down. Some king or queen sends out their ministers and said, you guys are really dumb, stop doing that. And so it's hard, but here we are in the middle of a pandemic where not enough, I will say, in my opinion, which is never humble, people are staying at home, but a lot of people are. There's a lot of us who are eating half turkeys and who are eating, looking for tiny turkeys, and who are not having the people that they like to have. Aaron is one of our Changing Times community, has asked the very important question. I'm going to try and get her to do a whole Wednesday show on it, about the nature of sacrifice. Now, William brought that up already, that Advent was supposed to be a time of preparation. I mean,
it's preparation and anticipation. It's different from the Lenten period where one really is, there's more anticipation in Advent because you're looking forward to a birth.
Well, there's always anticipation with
and,
a birth.
and it's preparation, penitential preparation, yes, but it's with a different feel than Lent, which leads, of course, through the crucifixion to resurrection, with the reminder that Easter doesn't happen without Good Friday.
But I'm just, we don't have a lot in modern America of the fast days. We have feast days, but we don't have fast days. We have Christmas, and we don't have Advent. And not a lot of people, I'm not sure how many of the Catholics and how many of people who check Catholic on the census are actually practicing Catholics. People joke about giving up things for Lent, but do they?
Yes, I do know people. And it's not just Catholics. I'm Episcopalian.
I always thought
Lutherans also
thing.
observe Advent. So it's a broader practice than just, and even some of the evangelical churches are getting into it now as a spiritual practice.
I encourage pagans to get into it as a spiritual practice. The idea of there will be times for fasting and times for feasting. There's times for dancing and times for mourning. There's a purpose for sacrifice. If you have to sacrifice being with your family in order to keep your family alive, that's a good deal, I think. But we're not very big on sacrifice. I think we like symbolic sacrifices. I fear that a lot of the sacrifices modern people do are like the rich people paying money for a to get a pardon in the Middle Ages before the Reformation, because they want. I mean, anytime there is a Reformation, anytime there is a revolution, it's because things have gotten pretty bad, and somebody said we can't put up with that anymore. And we are trying to find a way of keeping going, but we are holding on at the same time so very, very hard to the things we wanted. A lot of what we've been talking about, because I'm dealing with a bunch of SCA scholars here who love history, and that's a joy in our lives, isn't a joy in the average American's lives. They don't know history. What most people remember is what they know of their life, and then maybe what they know of their grandparents' lives. A lot of people these days are idealizing the 50s and maybe the 40s. And my God, Norman Rockwell was our great icon painter, who showed us a very, very idealized America that we remember in a, okay, we can say, oh yes, Ozzie and Harriet and Lucy and all of those great images we have tell what America used to be. And they don't remember Jim Crow, and they don't remember sundown, and we don't remember that there are just some places where they did not let Jews in. And
I'm gonna argue your point on Norman Rockwell.
Oh, you don't think he was our icon painter?
He was, but he also painted a lot of very powerful works on the theme of segregation.
That's true.
Those don't show up in the happy, feel-good sites and books.
I have a book of his, of all of his magazine covers at Christmas time. Oh my gosh, was he a Christmas painter? Talk about,
But yeah, Kath, is exactly right. He did tackle other subjects and isn't, just the feel good.
yeah, but he didn't.
Happy America.
We do,
And, but and I've had Eisenhower in the 50s a bit rehabilitated for me, thanks to Heather Cox Richardson.
Oh, tell me about Heather. I don't know Heather Cox Richardson.
She's a historian, and
Mhm.
she started, I don't know how long ago now, she started her Letters from an American on Facebook. And she's also doing, with the start of the pandemic, she started doing history talks.
Oh, neat.
And she's been doing them, and her Tuesday one would be history, the history and politics chat. So she would take questions.
Oh,
And then
neat.
her Thursday, she first talked about her most recently published book and went through that. And then she, a few weeks ago, just finished up a history of the Republican Party, taking it right up to the Trump era. And what she did to rehabilitate Eisenhower for me was that, she explained why he ran for president, which was against some, and this is, again, probably not the place to go into it. I could probably go into it with you separately.
Yes. Yes, if anybody didn't.
But she
like
definitely, because Eisenhower was not the extremist that some Republicans were. And in fact, when he threw his hat in the ring in 1952, because he opposed the Taft Republicans. And Eisenhower knew that the liberal consensus, which is the whole series of ideas that came out of the New Deal, which included the GI Bill, which the Taft Republicans opposed, was extremely popular and in fact good for America. So, it's just, so she's, and he was not, Eisenhower did not like Joe McCarthy. But Joe McCarthy was almost a lot like Trump in some ways, a force of nature almost. And it took others to stop him. But but it is also, of course, the era, as has been pointed out here, of the putting in God we trust on our money, and adding the words one nation under God to the Pledge of Allegiance, which wasn't there. It was also a very using religion to counter communism.
Yeah.
But Heather Cox Richardson has been because wasn't that thoroughly schooled in American history. I'm an ancient. Ancient history, I know backwards, forwards, and inside out. But I've learned a lot about American history to help me deal with what's going on now.
I'm kind of the same way. I loved history, but once men were wearing trousers and not carrying swords, I just lost interest. And so,
I'm interested in other periods. It's just I had never done them in depth.
But anytime I look at a new period, once you get to the people part of history and past the dates and battles and names of the rulers, it suddenly gets interesting. So, yeah, sorry for you guys who don't like history, but it's context. Context is so much.
And history is people.
And people is what we're dealing with now. And right now we're dealing with the plague. And this is not the first time people had to deal with trying to celebrate in the middle of a plague.
1918, and the flu, the influenza pandemic, which didn't peter out until 1922 or so, and didn't fully kind of vanish into the woodwork, although it was still around, 1924, and then resurfaced, I think, 3 more times.
Yeah.
Before it totally vanished. It was the H1N1 flu strain. And of course they didn't even know what viruses were back in 1918. I also pointed out that patient 0 was at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas.
The more I study it, the more fascinating it gets. But it's
the idea that people can't, getting back kind of to the theme of sacrifice. People, and again, it's not just American character, because you're getting people are resisting in other places as well to the masking and all the rest of it. It's they're it's sort of like, love your neighbor, wear a mask. Love your neighbor, social distance, and wear a mask.
Wash your hands and wear the damn mask.
What we're getting into now, of course, is fatigue. And it happened in 1918 as well.
It did.
Things got better through the summer months, and then in the fall it ramped up again. The second wave occurred in the fall of 1918. And then they had 2 more waves, at least 2 more waves after that.
And they had similar bits where you could see that when they would loosen restrictions and people would come out for a big parade or something, then you'd have a sudden spike. It's like, yeah, you'd almost think it was contagious. But they knew. They knew that wearing a mask made a difference. And I was amazed to read about how they were mask resistors during the Spanish flu.
There were a lot of places where they just, when they issued the mandatories, when they got the most resistance.
I saw a
We don't want-
report this afternoon of a recent study that's just been completed, I think out of a university in Scotland somewhere, where they tracked the 1918 pandemic cases and deaths and mapped them on a graph and mapped the COVID rates for the same area in Britain so far. And the graphs pretty much overlaid each other. They did the same exact kind of trajectory, except that the 1918 one went down further than the COVID in the summer. We are not doing as well.
COVID has got the added wrinkle of you can be totally asymptomatic and a spreader.
Yeah,
Whereas
that's
the
hard.
flu, you generally have to be showing symptoms, you know, to be contagious. That's the scary thing about COVID.
And you
Yeah.
cannot
It's like we're
convince
all
people
afraid.
it's just flu people about the asymptomatic part. You just can't.
I think part of that may be because we've taken all of our sickness and death out of the house and the home. People used to die at home. The doctors would come here. And so people knew that people were dying. People knew people were sick, and now we take them away and you don't think about them anymore. If you aren't in that immediate family, and it's heartbreaking. People can't have funerals. They're having video funerals. Well, three cheers for having Zoom and having the video communicate. I'm planning on talking through video to friends tomorrow and loved ones, but
Yeah,
as
I'll
opposed
be
to
joining people for Thanksgiving tomorrow via Zoom.
say hi, but it's hard. I mean, we had the total chaos of having people coming from Pennsylvania and Maine, and I was in Massachusetts at the time, and they would all converge, I bet, in many households like ours on whoever had a large house in the center. And remember the whole idea of the kids' table and the joys of when you finally were able to join the adults' table, which basically had something to do with how many of the older people were dying off so you could fit them on the same table. But it was chaos. It was madness, and you got to see cousins that you only saw once a year, and there is something bonding about seeing these people once a year that you wouldn't. In the old days, a lot of our holidays are a little nebulous because there was a season, because you had to have a time when you could leave the farm, you find somebody who could watch the animals and keep it going, and then you would travel however long you're probably walking or horseback or in a sleigh, and you'd get there when you could, and you'd leave after a couple days when they ran out of food. But it wasn't this day and I'll see you at 6 o'clock, because they didn't have that precision then. I'm sorry, I'm babbling. But I think you've got to have the time when you're not eating as well, when you're simplifying your life, as well as the times when you're celebrating. I think I'm very big into holidays. I love holidays. I think that being able to celebrate tomorrow, oddly enough, is also Cake Day. But Cake Day is November 26th, not the fourth Thursday, which bounces around.
Mhm.
So, you know, because cake is a good thing to celebrate, but not on Thanksgiving. That's a little odd. But, you know, there are times that we should, if there's going to be a season of license, a Saturnalia, a 12 days of Christmas, there should be an Advent. There should be a time of just living on beans and pulses and bread, so that you can balance off, I think. But
Well, that was part of some of the origins of the fast during Lent, was because that's your lean time, you know, because actually the leanest times were until you started your first harvest. While everything was growing in the fields, you're still eking out from your winter. So Lent tended to fall at just the right time to encourage people to, slow down, and we'll get through this, but put a religious layer on top of it. But Lent did actually fall during a lean time anyway in your agricultural communities.
yeah, and the carnival, let's eat up the last of the meat, let's use up the last of the fat, let's use up the last of the butter. Well, it's probably going to go bad anyway. So eat it while it's still good, and then get spiritual payback from eating, living on your bread and very little else, and then and let the chickens hatch their eggs. But I've had a really good time talking with people who actually have history in their heads. It's wonderful. But this is probably not going to be one of the shows that gets a lot of hits on YouTube. But thank you for joining me. And I think I've got Catherine Kane next week, our favorite small medium at large, who's usually talking about something healing. And thank you for coming. And I will. I don't think we came to any conclusions, but it's.
And that's okay. A
Yeah,
discussion doesn't have to lead to a conclusion.
No,
It can just be a sharing of ideas.
Yeah, it does. It's a good thing.
And we don't have to solve the problems of the world.
So we have that YouTube thing from William, and we got your gosh, can I read my own writing? Heather Cox Richardson.
Heather Cox Richardson. She's on Facebook.
I gotta go.
An author. Her letters. She's actually kept me sane.
Well, thank you, Heather. So.
No, I mean, some of her stuff, especially as the run up to the election, she's really kept me on the, from
yeah, that was a hard period.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we're going to be we will probably talk some more about more fun things later on in the month, and maybe some deep things too. But that's enough for now. And let's see, where's my stop recording button? There it is. Okay. Please tell your friends, and we're going to have a lot of
recording
for things Wednesdays, and we'll just keep putting them up and have fun. Okay, thanks for joining us, and see you next week. Bye. Stop recording. Yes.